Hello, good morning everyone, and welcome to your Learning at Work week, second in our sessions. This morning we're going to be looking at creative thinking with Liz Osland. So over to you, Liz.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Yeah, my name is Liz Osland. I'm a coach, trainer and facilitator here at 1080. And I'm going to be taking you through for the next 30 minutes creative thinking. But because it's Learning at Work week, there's this specific focus on create the future. So what does creative thinking mean for us in the workplace going forward? Before I even start, though, I'd like to say a few thank yous, I suppose. I think the 1080 collective group of coaches and trainers are awesome in this space. They're constantly challenging ourselves and also our clients by being open, staying curious, asking some great questions of our clients to think in a different way, shift their mindset, change their perspective. And for me, yes, there's the whole technology side of creative thinking, but I'm going to focus very much today more on that human and mindset part. In terms of my involvement in creative thinking, I've been fortunate to surround myself with some really creative thinkers, coaches. I've worked with Tony Bazan for a number of years, inventor of mind mapping, and also Chris Griffiths, who's the author of the Creative Thinking Handbook. I'd highly go and recommend have a read of that after the session, and also AOA, which is a really fantastic creative thinking tool. So I'll be talking a little bit more about that throughout the session. I'm going to keep it quite high level. We've only got half an hour. There's so many different things that we can touch on. Anybody who's ever been in one of my sessions will know that the 5W1H tool is one of my all-time favorites. Who, what, where, when, why, and how. And this in itself is a really great tool for us to use when we want to think creatively, because it helps us get down all of our questions and remove any of the assumptions and biases that we have. So I'm going to simply use that tool to take you through creative thinking and the future. So what's it even about? Well, it's quite funny because even since I sort of created and designed these slides, the world has now exploded in the conversations around AI and ChatGPT. And I think that just shows how quickly this space is moving on the technology side. WEF, the World Economic Forum, have come out with the top 10 skills that are on the rise. And interestingly enough, number one at the top there is creative thinking. Oxymoron. Number two is analytical thinking. So that is something that we're going to look at. But yeah, number one being creative thinking. And I think that's because AI can give us some really great insights. It's really good at working with published data. What it's not so good at is working with unpredicted human emotions. And I think that's the one thing as humans that we're going to constantly have over AI is our ability to think critically, think creatively, and also navigate that uniqueness of humans, which is we have emotions, and how do we manage those as part of the process. These skills lists obviously change throughout time, but creative thinking is always in the top 10, but for right now it is up there, number one. So very pertinent that we're talking about it today in terms of Learning at Work week. So what is it? If you start looking at definitions, it's really quite interesting because the Oxford Dictionary says it's the use of imagination or original ideas to create something is inventiveness. So having ideas and not acting on being imaginative. Okay, so just hold that thought for a moment, because that means that every single one of us has thoughts in our heads. We have ideas. So we all have an imagination. But it's what we decide to do with that thinking and those thoughts that turns it into creativity and innovation. So creativity is coming up with the new and useful ideas, and innovation is the successful implementation of those ideas. And this is where a lot of people get confused with the difference or similarities between creativity and innovation. So creativity is actually what drives the innovation. It's turning it into something useful. And 61% of employees say they're expected to come up with creative ideas or new ways to do things at work. So, over 50% of us are being asked that as part of our job roles. But with only 30% of employees saying that they're given the time to think or discuss new ideas daily. So, you know, we are caught up in this culture of busyness. This is an expectation of us, yet we don't have the time or create the spaces to think creatively. And it's becoming increasingly important to develop our creative thinking muscles. And there's a nice quote there for you at the bottom of the slide as well. So Edward de Bono, if you don't know of him or have heard of him, has some great ideas, books, tools and resources about looking at things in a different way, probably most famous for his 6 hat thinking. So go and check that out if that's something of interest to you. So let's have a look at what creative thinking is and what it isn't. There isn't any research to prove that we have a genetic link. It's not as part of our DNA. You're not born necessarily being creative. And for a lot of us, that is a blocker. It's an obstacle. You're asked to brainstorm, you're asked to be creative, come up with new ideas, and you put your own barriers up going, oh, but I'm not the creative person. The slide before has shown us that we all have imagination. It's understanding the processes of how we can turn those into ideas, which is the creativity that leads to innovation. So I think that's the first myth we can almost bust. It's also not childish. As I said, I do a lot of work in mind mapping, visual mapping, innovation techniques. I'm a Lego series play facilitator. And those conversations have to be framed quite carefully, depending on the audience. You know, a lot of executives will see it as this sort of, oh, creative thinking is this fluffy thing and it's just childish. You know, I'm not going to engage in that. Creativity is not logical. There isn't a straightforwardness to it. It is quite sporadic. It's quite spontaneous. And it's not practical and systematic. You can't put it into a shoebox and say, now is the time that I'm going to ideate and I'm going to come up with my best ideas. It doesn't necessarily work that way. In terms of it being a personality trait as well, lots of people think that it's to do with our psychological makeup, and that some of us are just naturally more creative as artists or musicians. That's not necessarily the case. And also creativity isn't always available to us. As I said, it can't be told, now you've got an idea, you know, now you've got an hour, you need to go and think about some creative ideas. It doesn't necessarily work that way. What creative thinking is, though, it is a learned skill. It's about a mindset shift. It's understanding that although it's spontaneous, it can also fit into a bigger picture and a process. And if we flip our thinking on it, if we change the words from being childish to childlike, for any of you that are around children, you know, their imagination and thought process and what they believe can be possible is incredible. And there's something about tapping into that more childlike ability than being childish. And it's about being patient with it as well. Creative thinking takes time. And I'll come on to that in a moment. And it's about using all of our brain. It's managing some of the logical thinking that we have as well as the ideation. But it does need the right environment to flourish. And that's part of our responsibility in the workplace to create that space and time. So I mentioned there, it can be part of a process. And I think this really helps people understand the different parts of being creative. And you'll have strengths and parts of the process you'll be better at than others. So the first thing is that we need to define what the problem actually is. Now that does take us to a more logical, linear way of thinking, possibly our left brain. And then you have to do some research around it, prepare some thoughts around what is that problem so you can create a real clear statement. So we are looking for facts and logic at this point. And then maybe what is seen more as the creative thinking process is then actually coming up with the ideas, the brainstorming, what are some of the solutions to that. And this is where then you need to allow some time. If you come up with some ideas, the old adage is we'll just sleep on it, you know, and just see where does that lead to in terms of other ideas. Then you can start thinking about analysing what are some of those best solutions, how you're going to implement them, and make sure that you're monitoring and evaluating. So as you can see throughout the process, some people are going to have strengths. Some people are going to be really, really good at that fact finding, the research, gathering the data. That still feeds into the creative thinking process. Other people, yes, are going to be more comfortable and better at coming up the wild and the wacky ideas. So when we're in the workplace, it is about understanding what are some people's strengths, where can you put people as part of the bigger creative thinking process so that you can generate some of those best ideas for implementation. So who can be a creative thinker then? I'm hoping you're all shouting at me now saying everybody. Absolutely, anybody can be a creative thinker as long as they are willing to. This is the human side of it, the mindset part. So you're going to see a block of Duplo on the screen, and think in your head now, what do you see? Most of you are going to see it as a white block, a white Duplo. And I actually do this as part of Lego Serious Play facilitation. I've got my block here and I go around the room and I'll say to people, what do you see? And they're looking at me a little bit confused going, it's a Duplo box. Yeah, yeah, it's a white Duplo box. And what we're doing at that point is using our adult literal logical brains. Yeah, it is a white Duplo box, but it can be anything that you want it to be. And so when I challenge people with that, then it literally can be anything. It could be an ice cube. It can be a polar bear. It can be a cloud. And I get people to build visualizations with Lego specifically for that purpose. They're never going to find a piece of Lego that is a literal representation of what they're trying to communicate. Unless you paid a lot of money, there's not going to be a little Lego person that looks identical to you. And it forces you to get creative and look at things from a different perspective and also work in metaphors. So, we've got the block. What this represents is, big picture, because it is the cloud. So it literally can be anything you want it to be. And it's the same with children. And that's why it's the childlike qualities. Anyone who's been around children at birthdays or Christmas and you give them the toys that are all lovely wrapped up in the box, what do? They take the toys out, they don't play with it, and they're in awe of the box. Now we look at it thinking, oh my goodness, it's just a box, it's for packaging. They look at it and it can be anything they want it to be, a pirate ship, a rocket, a spaceship. So there's something that we can take from that. Building down some of the safety nets and barriers that we put around ourselves and to help come up with those creative ideas. And I created this map for you to talk about creating the space to be creative. And this whole slide in itself, if I'm honest, was creating it, became a little bit of an oxymoron. Because when we're talking about creative thinking, we are talking about two parts. Looking forward into the future, which involves strategy, it involves planning, but it also involves uncertainties and things that we don't know that's going to happen yet. It definitely involves technology, but it also involves, as I said, the human side. So some elements that I think we can be mindful of about how we can get into the right creative thinking space is time. Time twofold. If we ourselves to get bored, and this is a big issue with anybody who's got teenagers at the moment and hooked to their phones and social media, if we allow ourselves to get bored, that's actually when we start getting really creative, and we're not giving ourselves enough time at the moment to be distracted. We're constantly plugged in, either plugged into the phone or plugged into Netflix or plugged into our laptops, and we don't have those moments just to daydream, to be mindful, take a breath and be present and just look at a flower in the garden, look at a plant and see what, where does that take your brain and spark ideas. So time is definitely a factor if we want to be creative. We've got to give ourselves time to be creative. In terms of the mindset, there are some shifts that maybe we need to make. We've got to remove our assumptions. We've got to remove our biases, stay really curious to different ways of thinking, different perspectives, and be available to listen. We've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. So in the creative thinking process, we want to do twice as much listening as we do talking. And just absorb, what is being said, what's the feeling in the room, what are the ideas that are being put forward. And again, I have a lot of clients who struggle with this statement, healthy conflict. You say the word conflict to them and immediately they're like, oh, but conflict's a bad thing. You know, we don't want conflict in our workplace and we want to run away from it. But healthy conflict is where you can put forward ideas and they be different and people disagree with them. They just don't slam them down. Essentially, what we're talking about is creating these psychological safe spaces. You know, I hear what you're saying, I disagree with you, but I'm not going to get into a fight with you over it. You know, it's a difference of opinion that we're going to manage in a healthy way. And that's actually what drives creative thinking, drives innovation in the workplace, is having different perspectives, different ages, different cultures, different backgrounds, different thinking. When we're creative thinking as well, we need to adopt an idea of lifelong learning. Metacognition is termed as the way that we think. It's actually quite hard to think about our thinking and how we approach things and how we apply our thinking. And a lot of it is trial and error. A big fear factor around the creative thinking process is that analysis paralysis and fear of failure. Don't want to do something to make a mistake, to have to own up to it and say, now we need to change it. But we need to get good at trial and error because the world is changing around us so fast. If we're not willing to attempt things and iterate quickly, we're just going to be stuck in the same zone. And technology, again, this is the twofold. The whole discussion around AI recently has just exploded in the last couple of weeks. And we can, AI is, WEF has come out and said that as AI, put my teeth back in, as AI gets more intelligent, it becomes more helpful at distracting us. So what I mean by that, and I think what WEF are talking about, is AI can actually free up our time. So if we're using AI cleverly and effectively, as humans, it will give us more time. If we've got more time, we go back to the beginning of the map, and we're going to have a space to think more creatively. But that will take conscious effort on our part to have a digital detox at the same time. Let it be our friend, almost let AI and technology be our colleague. We need to learn to adapt and evolve with it, but at the same time, getting quite disciplined with when we can unplug and have that digital detox. So yeah, we can use technology to capitalize the elements that we need to as humans to be in the right creative thinking space. So there's lots and lots of tools and techniques that you can use to be a creative thinker. A great one that you can do straight after this session is your own personal SWOT. Where are your strengths? Where are your weaknesses? What are your opportunities? What are your threats when it comes to the creative thinking process? And when you know your strengths, really focus on them and how can I make them even better? And also thinking about your team and where their strengths lie to get everybody involved in the whole process. Another one is self-awareness. So as I mentioned, we've got lots of assumptions and biases that we all hold. That's just human nature. And there's different ones that drive us. So an anchoring bias is relying too much on the first piece of information that we hear. So if I think about my parents who are a little bit older, they read the same newspaper. And that is gospel. It's the first news site that they go to, and that's what they latch on to. And of course, if we don't go looking for other information, that can feed our biases. Confirmation bias as well, trusting information that we believe. We saw that play out in elections. Anyone on social media will know, you look at a piece of information and the algorithms then just start feeding us what we've already seen because it thinks we like it. And then that becomes quite dangerous because we start going into echo chambers. So sometimes you've got to shortcut it and say, okay, that's what I've seen that is supporting the facts. What about if I just go and search over here what doesn't support it to open up new information? Negativity bias as well. So no doubt when you're in the supermarket, you'll see your meat or packaging or whatever it says, and it'll say 75% lean meat. It's actually 25% fat, and it's how it's framed as to where we will lean to in terms of what we think is better and how we will make our choices and decisions. And also outcome bias. So we're focusing our decisions solely based on what the outcomes are. So the first thing we can do is check what are some of those assumptions and biases that we're bringing into the creative thinking process, and how can we challenge them for ourselves and others to overcome them. And this is probably the trickiest one, if I'm honest, because it's so entrenched in our conditioning. The other one is thinking about our brain and how it works. So I touched on before, this is by the work of Roger Sperry, quite famous, left brain, right brain thinking. And left brain is associated with the logical, the facts, the orders, numbers, and quite analytical. And then the right brain is associated more with the creativity, the imagination, the feelings, and quite generative. But I would challenge you to say, well, what about using whole brain thinking? If you were to say somebody like Mozart, you would probably say, oh, well, he must use right brain. He's a musician. He's very creative. But anybody who's ever seen music will see music is created in lines, in numbers, in patterns, and it's quite linear in its creation. So somebody like Mozart, who seemed to be very creative, actually practiced whole brain thinking. So it's about flexing our brains and getting used to sometimes stepping out of our comfort zone and actually using both parts of our brain. We can use technology, as I said, it is there. It can be our colleague, it can be our friend. It can feel a little bit overwhelming at times. So it helps us, though, when we find the right technology to work in a non-linear way. So it pushes us to move from the left brain over into the right. When you find the right technology as well, you can capture those thoughts in the moment so they're not lost. Because if you're like me, some of my best ideas come when I'm out paddleboarding, or I'm in the shower, or I'm sitting in the garden, or I'm just about to go to sleep. And there's a good reason for that, because we come up with some of our best ideas in a relaxed state, because we're letting our subconscious work. So, whether it's an app on your phone or something, just so it's not lost, and then you can incubate those ideas. What you can see on the screen here is something called AOA. Fantastic collaboration tool, and actually this one now with mind mapping has got AI incorporated into it, so this is quite pushing it in the sense of letting us use AI as part of our own creative thinking. So you put an idea into a branch, and let's say you're a little bit stuck, you don't even know where to start, and you can click for the AI to generate some ideas for you, and you can keep on going with what that is giving you, or then sort of do the digital detox and go, right, that's got me started, now I want to use my brain. So there's so many amazing things out there for you. Let it be our friend to free up some time for our own thinking. So this idea then about creating space and generating ideas, you've got to set some ground rules. As I said, remove those assumptions and biases. It's a good idea to brainstorm individually first and then come together as a group. Once you're creating these psychological safe spaces, it allows every person to be part of the process. Their voice is heard, their ideas matter. And even if those ideas aren't acted on, they could become the stepping stone to the next great idea. But they feel that, we've been part of the process because I put my ideas forward. And it's also about, at this point, generating quantity over quality. So as many ideas as you can. We don't want to put the left brain logic, but that'd never work. It's this what if, staying curious mindset. You can do something called perceptions of positions. So this is looking at things from a different perspective. It helps you remove the biases and move away from just because that's the way we've always done it, it's going to carry on that way. So after the session, maybe think about a challenge or a problem that you're focusing, Pick a person completely unrelated to that problem. What would an 80-year-old say to me? What would Elon Musk say to me? What would a teacher say to me? People completely not related to you and your problem, and see what insights those give to you. Equally, choose a company or up to 4 companies. What would a charity say to me about this problem? What would Virgin say to me about this problem? Or, and just pick people from completely diverse backgrounds and companies. Now, yes, you're making a couple of assumptions, but it's just to shift your brain in terms of the linear way that you're thinking, and then see what further ideas that brings for you. Another great one that I think is vastly underused is this idea of flip it. So reversing the problem to find the solution. So if you're being asked, right, off you go, you need to increase sales. What about if you were to lose sales and lose customers, and you wrote down all the things that you would have to do to lose your customers? Be rubbish on customer service, have really long wait times. It becomes a real eye-opener when you flip it back and go, oh gosh, they are some of the things that we're actually doing. So what do we now need to do to overcome that thinking? So again, this is something you can give a go after the session. So where and when to be creative? A lot of the time, but not always. So there's some research coming out by Alice Flattery around disengagement. So when you are creating ideas, it's this idea that we come up with our best ideas when we're in a relaxed state. So seek out those spaces where you get that dopamine release, when you are maybe exercising, relaxing, engaging, being happy, socializing. Basically any activity that makes you relaxed. And that's where I think we can't force people and say, booked out a meeting room, go and generate some ideas. It doesn't necessarily happen that way, which then comes to the other part of the slide, this idea of incubation. So sleep on it, give it a little bit of time, let the subconscious mind work to see where else do those ideas go. So disengagement and distraction. Again, might feel a little bit of an oxymoron, but will definitely help you be more creative. And it's all about getting ahead of the curve. Some of you may be familiar with this sigmoid curve by Charles Handy. We start off in the growth phase and we keep on going up. But not everybody can be the number 1, number 2, number 3 in their businesses. And unless we're looking to go ahead to catch the next curve, the red one, and planning ahead and thinking about what are the latest changes in the industry, your company will start diminishing. And it's that little point there that you can see where you really have to push the team and engage people to be looking ahead and coming up with those new and innovative solutions. There's so many reasons why we need to be creative in the workplace. Lots of you will have heard of VUCA. So we operate in a VUCA world, meaning it's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, and it's ambiguous. That term's been around from the military since about the 1980s. But even as part of putting this slide deck together, I came across what's on the right-hand side from digital leadership, that actually now we're in a BANI world. And I found this fascinating. So the world is now brittle, anxious, non-linear, and incomprehensible. So brittle meaning that we're in the pursuit of maximizing profit at the expense of maybe other factors. We've got some quite anxious world leaders, as well as the media promoting and driving a lot of our anxieties. It's non-linear because what worked in the past absolutely isn't working anymore. So we can't quite connect those dots. And it's incomprehensible because some of the technology to us just feels so out there and so alien that, that's almost like overwhelming us as well. And this is why creative thinking is needed. Just like all the strategies we've used to thrive in a VUCA world before, creative thinking is absolutely going to help us to survive and thrive in a BANI world going forward. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you go and have a look for yourself. There's lots of statistics in the benefits of creative thinking. Most of them are pointing to giving time to generate ideas, allowing people the space, allowing people the time to get out in nature, downtime to come up with those ideas. And also this idea of diversity of thought. The more diversity we have in the workplace, the higher the revenue and the more ideas that we come up with. So just to wrap up, for those of you that have joined, have a little reflection now at the end of the session or straight away afterwards, and think for yourselves as part of creative thinking and moving forward into the future, what is something that you need to stop doing? You've decided it's not working well for you as part of the process. What is something that you want to carry on doing? You're already doing it and it's serving you well. And more importantly, what's a change? What is one thing that you're going to do that's new as part of the creative thinking process? So thank you, Hannah.
Thank you, Liz. That was a great session. We've got a quick question actually. I know we've run a little bit over, but from Liz, who says, "Can you learn how to think creatively?" Now, I think that came in before the session. I didn't put up, but actually, I think as you've shown us, we most certainly can.
Yeah, as long as you understand it's part of the process and what part of the process you're in, and you're willing to open your mind, absolutely. And we can do lots of tests, read different books to really stretch our thinking in that stage. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks, Liz. And Avashi said, "Thank you, Liz. Very engaging. Agreed and love the idea of using the subconscious mind." I absolutely love that idea, and I like the idea of just jotting down your ideas as they come to you. And you're absolutely right. Best ideas, as they say, come to you in the shower.
Yeah, in our relaxed state, definitely. So capture those because they're some of the best ones. Yeah.
So thank you. So thank you, Liz, for an absolutely great session. That was brilliant. We all hope you've enjoyed your Learning at Work week. Feel free to revisit these and share and like the videos. And thank you very much.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.